Matthew, Mark, and Luke are labeled with that Greek-based word synoptic because they see and tell some of the stories about Jesus together, occasionally in verbatim lockstep. If you did that sort of thing on a term paper, it would be called plagiarism, and you'd hear about it from your instructor in the administration. But it happens throughout Matthew and Luke. One estimate says that 80% of Mark's 661 verses are reproduced, about 49.5% of Matthew, 526 verses, and 37.4% of Luke, about 430 verses, come from, in one way or another, Mark. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Matthew again, so you can make comparisons. The vertical scale is 32 verses per inch. Pink is for the passages in Mark and at least one other, so that's the synoptic. Pink is synoptic.
Let's say I'm the lawyer. I got my 4 witnesses. Then just before I go into court, I find out I don't have 4 witnesses. I have one guy who saw it and told his 3 buddies that night over a beer. 200 years of research into Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John has come up with certain general conclusions. That Mark is the first one written. And that nobody else, Matthew, Luke, seems to have any story, any consistent story starting with John the Baptist, working through this, all the way up to Jerusalem, except Mark's script. Nobody seems able to tell the story different. So the consensus is that the general idea that we are dealing with 4 witnesses just doesn't work. The names that are put on those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, don't appear till the 2nd century, it would seem.
It is pretty clear that the Gospels of the New Testament are not eyewitness reports of what happened in the life of Jesus. It is almost certain that the immediate followers of Jesus could not write. Massive literacy didn't come about until the Industrial Revolution. In ancient cultures, in fact, most people could not read or write, and far more people could read than could write. The people who were highly literate were the people who were very wealthy. They came from very wealthy families. They were almost always in urban settings, who had the leisure and finances to get a high-level education. There have been studies of literacy in ancient Palestine, where Jesus ministered. These estimates indicate that because Palestine was far more rural than many other places in the Roman Empire, there were lower literacy rates. Many people think that every Jewish boy went to synagogue school and learned how to read and write. That appears to be a modern myth. In fact, ancient literacy in Palestine was very low. The best estimates indicate that probably at the time of Jesus, maybe 3% of the population was roughly literate. Far fewer than that could write, especially write books. The other thing to point out is that Jesus' native language and the native language of his followers was Aramaic. The New Testament Gospels were written in Greek. They not only survive in Greek, they were originally written in Greek. Whoever wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were highly educated, Greek-speaking Christians. These books are normally dated 30, 40, or 50 years after Jesus' death, probably some years after the death of his apostles.